I'm not sure what that will do for our
Sluggy Randolph. Those guys who get the Celtics bench.
So I'm not okay. Good evening. This is Media Reporter, and I'm Howard Homonoff. Our guest tonight is Cliff Chenfeld, who is the co-founder, CEO of Razor and Tie, the largest, I believe, independent record label in the country. And Cliff, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Great to be here, Howard. Thanks for having me.
And I think you have a particularly unique background that I'd love to start out with. All right, so we're a New York-based show. You grew up in the heart of the Midwest, Columbus, Ohio. Take us back. It's the mid-'70s. It's Columbus, Ohio. What is that like, and how does that influence kind of your cultural take on things? Because I think that I see the influences.
Wow, Columbus, Ohio in the mid-'70s. It was trying to figure out who was better, Boston or Journey. I'm not quite sure.
Boston.
Boston.
Yeah. I think that's been decided.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Columbus in the mid-'70s. Well, I've had the good fortune of growing up in Columbus and living in New York, though, for the last 30 years. So when I need to be from New York, I can be from New York. And when I need to represent heartland, real American values, I can be from Columbus, Ohio. But, we moved to Columbus when I was 10 in 1970. And I lived in a place that was very diverse, actually. Living in Columbus, you would think that everybody looked like me and acted like me, but actually not the case. I moved from Albany, New York, and I actually found Columbus to be a much more diverse place. So where I grew up, my high school was very mixed, Jewish, African American, white. I mean, we had everyone there. And I think that I at least learned to appreciate sort of what people did when they didn't live in New York or Los Angeles. I think there was some of that was going on. And then I went to Ohio State, and sort of Ohio State at the time that I went there had a very lax policy of letting students in who graduated from Ohio high school. I think back then, if you had a 2.0 grade average and graduated from an Ohio high school, you were going to be able to get into Ohio State.
But at the time, you were dunking the ball at will on the basketball court, isn't that right?
Not at will,
Okay.
but if the stars were aligned perfectly, there was a very small breeze, and I was wearing, the right clothes, I could occasionally dunk. I was one of, I believe, 6 Jewish males under the height of 6 feet who could dunk in 1978.
That's been memorialized somewhere in the Ohio legislature. I don't remember exactly where, but we'll get our crack staff on
You can
that.
Google that if you'd like.
All right, excellent. I think for those of us who grew up in the 70s, there was this reverence sort of about the movies and music and things like that. Did that have much impact on not just what you loved then, but even in a sense sort of what business you wanted to go into or how you approached it?
That's a good question, and I just want to say one thing because I just did diss Ohio State. I want you to know today,
Yes.
I would not be able to get into Ohio State today, but back then everyone could get into Ohio State.
I'll say the same for both of my alma maters.
Okay.
And, probably another much broader list, but
Ohio State learned
Yes.
that they should up it, and they have. So, I think the 70s was sort of a unique time to grow up culturally because a lot of what happened in the 60s had not really gotten all the way out to mainstream culture until the 70s. I mean, if you really think about music, movies, television, the great shows that really kind of broke ground on television sort of in a cultural way really started in the 70s, whether it was All in the Family or MASH or whatever those things. So we kind of view Archie Bunker almost as a kind of a character out of the 60s, but all that really stuff started happening in the 70s. And it's sort of the whole kind of counterculture, which began in the 60s, which was really much more sort of fringe and much more kind of the kids and the hippies. Sort of, by the time I was in high school, everybody looked like that.
Right.
And everybody was doing what they weren't supposed to do. So I think that, you had that going on in the 70s. Then you had just the music situation, the music business and the music and rock was getting much bigger. The movies of the 70s, sort of the last gasp of a lot of the sort of more, where you kind of had independent movies that were still very commercial and you had serious people making very big movies. So I think that I think that there was I think growing up there, the impact of a lot of pop culture was very big on me, and I'd always been a music person, whether just obsessing about Beatles albums when I was 5 years old, or then attempting to do my own music, which was incredibly mediocre and uninspired. But whatever it was, kind of growing up in that era, I think had a huge impact on me.
Now, did you, in the household you grew up in, were you encouraged to go into music as you later did, or was it, here are the set of professionals, professions that you will be going into, and that's where you inevitably headed?
My mother is who. We're filming this shortly after Mother's Day, who is a wonderful mother, is and was really a product somewhat of the 60s. So my mother brought me up on Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary and Gordon Lightfoot, and took me to see a James Brown concert when I was 8, and the Jackson 5 when I was 10, and
Talk about diverse.
So and Pete Seeger when I was 9. So I really was very fortunate to have somebody who kind of, in addition to sort of I think my natural inclination to love music, I think having somebody like my mother who was living it and breathing it and loving it. I just took her to see Leonard Cohen about 2 weeks ago. It was great with my son, so we had probably the oldest person there and the youngest person there, except for Leonard, who's older than my mother. And so the music was not necessarily a career choice that was presented to me, but was just a huge part of our household in my childhood.
And so, what's the decision to become a lawyer, which is where you sort of professionally, you kind of begin your career? Was that obvious? Was it a surprise? What's the thought process going into it, and then later coming out?
Well, I'd really been very interested in two things growing up. I'd been interested in music, and I'd been interested in sort of politics, public policy. As I got older in college, I did music, I did some music things, and I worked at a record store and all that. But as I got older, I just thought that the potential of me doing something in music was limited. And I continued to be very interested in all kinds of public policy things. Envisioned that as we were sitting here today in 2013, I'd probably be the Attorney General or something of a Democratic administration, or something from that down. And so I wanted to go to law school to sort of pursue those kinds of things, and just figured the music was something that I'd love and would continue to do in one way or another, but not something that I would have anything to do with professionally. So I went to law school with that in mind, and had always wanted to live in New York, and so came to NYU Law School, and for a number of reasons, I did not end up doing the kind of legal work that I wanted to do. Partially, I wanted to stay in New York, and most of the things that I was interested in were in Washington, and the jobs that were in New York weren't as good. I had some student loans to retire, and I decided to go and try to make a little bit of money to retire those loans. And I basically just did not pursue or get to do in my short law career. I didn't really get to do the things that I was that interested in. And I got married, and our family wanted to stay here, and I didn't find what I really had wanted to do. And then I just think when you're a young lawyer, I clerked for a year, then I went to a big law firm, and I just think all of a sudden you're in that world, and it was hard for me to kind of make a transition.
So what's the spark? And it's a whole lifetime, clearly, of interest in music, but what's the spark that goes from the law practice to a very entrepreneurial kind of life?
I think there were a few sparks. I think that I was not happy being a litigator at a large law firm, or even a smaller law firm, doing primarily, large corporate conflicts. So I was not particularly liking what I was doing. And I blame my mother a little bit, who told me that I was supposed to really love what I do and be happy.
The same mom who you took to Leonard Cohen?
The same mom.
Okay.
Excuse me. The same mom who, played, Subterranean Homesick Blues for me in 1965. So I think that, in the back of my head, I was hearing my mother on some level saying, you're not happy. So I think that had some impact. And I had a buddy in law school, Craig Balsam, who is a year behind me in law school, who a couple years into his law career, I think, was feeling the same thing I was, and he also had a musical background. So Craig and I just started writing songs together. Surprisingly, I was no better than I was in the 70s. If Craig and I were listening to something that sounded like Tom Petty, we could write an incredibly mediocre, uninspired Tom Petty sounding song. So we had some basic competency, but that was about it. But Craig and I started writing songs together. We called ourselves Razor and Tie because we wrote a song called Razor and Tie about how we no longer wanted to answer to the man. Really impressive stuff. And to the extent that we had a spark, I'd say the most interesting thing that happened during those couple years is Craig and I were just kind of writing songs and sending them out, and this was sort of 3-4 years out of law school. We somehow, through a variety of crazy circumstances, were big Knicks fans and became connected to the Knicks. And this was in the late 80s, and the Knicks, this is for those who are Knicks fans, this is the Rick Pitino, late 80s, Patrick Ewing, Gerald Wilkins, Mark Jackson team. And Craig and I somehow were introduced to them and to Grandmaster Flash, and wrote a rap song for the Knicks called Proud to be a Knick in 1989. My name is Patrick, they call me the Beast. Once upon a time I ruled the Big East. Hoya, destroyer, top of the class. No one could stop me going to the glass. That's it.
Eminem,
So,
there we are.
Years before
Yes,
Eminem.
I mean,
years before Eminem.
Yeah.
So we wrote this rap song.
Maybe Vanilla Ice is a little more reminiscent, I don't know.
He was an inspiration at that point. So so we wrote the song for the Knicks. We got together with Grandmaster Flash. He produced. We were doing collaboration, Flash and us. And the Knicks were supposed to come into to a studio that we were working with, and they were going to record it. And that was going to be their theme song. And then they promptly went on a 5-game losing streak. And on the day we were supposed to record the song, Rick Pitino's office calls us and says they're not going to do a rap song if they can't even win a game. So we were all sort of sitting in the studio, like our hearts broken. Yeah. But at that moment, I honestly, as silly as it sounds, I was like, I got to do something I really like. I was so excited about this, this thing, and I hadn't been that excited about anything that I've been doing in my law life for 3 or 4 years. And just that moment is when we have to come up with something. By the way, I did not hate my law career. I just wasn't that excited about it. I wasn't doing what I was doing. So Craig and I really kind of, we tasted a little of the fun of it. And what happened very quickly after that is we came up with an idea. We were approaching 30, and this is 1989, 1990. And at that time, which is maybe hard for many to remember, and even harder for those who weren't even alive back then to remember, but the 70s were sort of the pariah decade. People were like embarrassed by them, bad, the economy was bad, gas lines, disco music, et cetera, et cetera. As I said earlier in the show, I actually loved the 70s. Craig and I thought that people would start becoming nostalgic for the 70s. The people who grew up in the 70s were becoming old enough to sort of jam their nostalgia on the rest of culture. They were spending money. They were starting to be in charge of TV stations and radio stations and making films, and all of a sudden their childhood was going to inform a lot of the decisions they made. And a lot of the people who grew up in the 70s were starting to have kids and be home and losing touch with pop culture. So they were going to start, becoming nostalgic and losing touch with pop music. So Craig and I said, let's start putting 70s compilation albums out together. Which at the time, which now seems, big deal. But back then, nobody was doing it. There was Time of Life, and they were putting, the greatest hits from 1957.
Yeah. The Mitch Miller catalog was,
Neil Sedaka, When Love Was Innocent,
Right.
So we, using our legal background and everything else, we basically made a deal to get the rights to all these hits from the 70s, but we decided we would get the most ridiculous songs from the 1970s, the one-hit wonders, the Billy Don't Be a Hero, Seasons in the Sun, Having My Baby, et cetera, et cetera. And we put a record out called Those Fabulous 70s that we said was from the 70s Preservation Society, which sort of existed. Anyone who bought a CD became a, quote, member of the society, so immediately we had 50,000 members. We put the CD on the air. We made a very funny, or seemingly funny, commercial with somebody dressed as the chairman of the 70s Preservation Society, how he was here to bring the 70s back. And then we hired...
I have to interrupt.
Sorry. Yes, please interrupt.
In terms of the interest of the anecdote,
yes.
If I'm right, who was or played the chairman of the 70s Preservation
In the
Society?
commercial?
Yeah.
Steve Geyer.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Jamie Orenstein.
Jamie Orenstein.
Wasn't there a link to
Judge,
who is, by the way, a federal judge now?
Judge Jamie Orenstein is on the cover of the album.
Okay.
Of this,
all right.
And
all
it's
right.
very good that you remember these.
Yeah,
yes, very good. By the way, cut me off. I feel like I'm just yammering
No,
away. Cut me off whenever you want to.
This is good stuff. So all right. So
I'll tell you one more anecdote.
Yes.
So we hired a publicist and created something called the 70s Preservation Society, which barely existed, and we were immediately on national television all over the place talking about the 70s. Right. Sometimes.
So 20 years before we have Facebook, etc., you were out there getting likes from people, creating members.
Yes. Gosh.
I mean, that's really. I mean, really, think about how hard people work to get people to like them today, to become members of their.
That's right.
Follow them on Twitter, to follow, like them on Facebook.
And they were paying us $25 to be friends.
And there you go. Right. Didn't even know what you had.
Wow. So that's true.
Okay.
Very good. So we hired this publicist, and all of a sudden we became the experts. We were on Joan Rivers, The Today Show, all these places talking about the 70s. And sometimes we talk as experts. When did the 70s really begin? When Nixon resigned, or on January 1st, 1970? Yeah. Or other times we'd be on, like, most ridiculous, with leisure suits on, just making fools of ourselves. And that's really how we started.
Yeah. So talk about now, talk a little bit about being an entrepreneur. You're kind of co-entrepreneur, so you had Craig, you had
Still do.
You have a great partner for all these years.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike one guy, in his mom's basement, cooking up an app, but you guys went into this together. Talk about being an entrepreneur in a time too before kind of the glitz or the perceived glitz of Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley, but being kind of on your own, running your business out of your apartment, etc. And what's that like?
Before it was cool to be an entrepreneur.
Before it was cool, that's right. I mean,
before entrepreneurs were like the romanticized kings, the small business people.
Right.
Well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I will say this to all those budding entrepreneurs out there: it's good to have a partner. And being an entrepreneur it requires, I think, a certain kind of personality in terms of there's a lot of surprises. There's a lot of opportunities. When things go bad, they can really go bad. So it's a lot of, you have to sort of be able to do that. And I think having a partner with you on that ride is good. Particularly a partner like I have, in terms of we really balance each other very well. And we're also in very similar situations. We're the same age, got married at around the same age, kids at around the same time. I think it's been very good just from that. It's not the only way to do it, right. But I think it's helped us a lot. Back then, I got to tell you, Howard, I don't even know if anyone called us entrepreneurs back then. It's like
nuts, probably.
Nuts.
What a lot of
my grandfather, very upset that I gave my
yeah.
my career.
Right.
My mother's father, not like my mother.
Yeah. Okay.
What is this 70s thing?
Right.
You had absolutely no idea what we were doing.
Yeah.
But I think that we were successful relatively quickly, and we put this record out. We created an 800 number and sold it, and we put it on TV, and then the next day, this money cleared into our bank account from these orders, and then we had all these packages to deliver, and we kind of were up and running.
Right.
So we didn't, and also I will also say that we were smart enough, I think, at the outset to not completely disengage ourselves from our law career. So I think to our colleagues, I think some of them thought that we were maybe having a slight premature midlife crisis and that we'd come back relatively soon.
Right.
So but we still had a bit of a safety net for a little bit of time. I think 18 months, 2 years, no one would have welcomed us back, but at that point. But I just think it was exciting, and it still is exciting to get up every day and try to invent something and come up with a new way of doing something and being responsible for the decisions you make or not. There's no one to blame.
Yeah.
You get lucky, you don't get lucky, but it's fun.
So talk about Razor and Tie today. What is Razor and Tie?
Well, in the 20-some years since that story occurred, we have evolved in many ways. I mean, the company started in 1990. Today, it bears very little resemblance to what Craig and I had in 1990, which is basically the two of us out of my apartment on 11th Street. Today, we are a record label, which in 2013, I always feel somewhat hesitant to use the word record label, but we're a recorded music company. So we sign artists and acquire the rights to masters and sell and market those. And I can get more into sort of what that means today compared to what it meant 15 years ago. We're also a music publishing company. So we signed writers who are writing a lot of the songs that, there's the recorded music business and there's the music publishing business. So we've gotten very much into the music publishing business in the last 4 or 5 years. And last year we were one of the top 10 music publishers in the country, including Sony and all of those people. And then about 11 or 12 years ago we started something called Kids Bop, which started really as Craig and I, our kids were much younger, and Craig and I were attending tons of birthday parties, and the kids were not happy because all the music was sort of preschool baby music, and the parents were not happy because they didn't want their kids to listen to Eminem and Britney Spears. And we came up with Kids Bop, which was this idea of having kids sing contemporary pop songs, but we'd only have them sing pop songs that were sort of okay for the kids and the parents. And it turned out to be a great thing. It's been the #1 kids audio brand in the United States for the last 12 years, sold 15 million copies of them, and each Kids Bop is a top 2 or 3 record in the country. And from Kids Bop, we've created a tour, we've created a very successful website, lots of marketing partnerships, a variety of extensions of Kids Bop.
So talk a little bit more about being in the kids entertainment business. And there's a lot of controversy about people marketing to children.
Sure.
And program length commercials and things like that. Talk a little bit about the challenges of that, problems, or how you work at that.
It's very challenging because as the technology has changed and there's so many different ways for companies and individuals and I guess predators to interact with children, anybody who's in that space now has to jump through many, many more hoops than they had to 10 years ago. And the laws keep changing, and the challenge is, well, there's sort of a challenge from a sort of just a marketing perspective, and then there's a legal challenge. The marketing perspective, at least where we've been with Kids Bop, is how to kind of balance the desire of the kids to feel like they're having some good experience with the parents whose concerns and fears grow regularly. And you're trying to balance that at a time when the goalposts as to what's sort of okay keep shifting. So songs that were provocative, songs that were not provocative, songs that were provocative 10 years ago, maybe not as provocative. Right. Yeah. So at Kids Bop, we're constantly, and because we have millions of parents and kids who trust us and figure if we're going to put something out and our name is on it, we've kind of vetted it for them. Sort of managing sort of those standards in a sort of changing cultural landscape can really be challenging. We do our best, and we have to sort of, and it's not just sort of the music we put out. Now we have a website. On the legal side, there's the COPPA rules, which really govern how you can interact with kids. Those are changing constantly, and so you have to anticipate also what they're going to do as you're making investments into the future. We're redoing our website. We're setting something up that we want to last for a long time, but there's all these discussion of new regulations and how you get permission from parents and kids. So it's really a lot to keep track of.
And who are you marketing to, really? Are you marketing to the kids? Are you marketing to the parents, or both?
Great question. After 12 or 13 years, I'm not completely sure if there's a simple answer to that. At that age, the Kids Bop audience is, for the kids who buy music, it's really 5 to 10. From the kids who are kind of getting involved in some of our extensions, like our website, the average age kid on our website is 11. And we have this thing called Kid Star, which is a contest, sort of a American Idol meets Kids Bop. And last year, the kid who won that was 13 or 14. So we're kind of dealing with a lot of different aged kids. I would say in selling the music, you have to kind of go typically more towards the kids, because they're at the point in their lives where they're proactive and influencing how parents make decisions, and if they see something they will say something, as opposed to somebody who's much younger. Yeah. But you really do need to have the parents have some awareness of it, because as I said before, their heightened level of sensitivity on these issues. They're just, I think they may give up when the kids are 14 or 15, but 8, 9, 7, what exactly are you listening to? Where did you get that from? So we try to maintain relations with both, but if we don't get the kids to come in, also at that age, the kids aren't that interested in their parents saying to them, hey, I heard there's this great new Kids Bop CD for you. Would you like to get it? It's much better coming from the kids.
So if you're in this marketing or selling to children and very successfully, does it turn you, I know your politics, we know each other well, does it turn you into a bit of a, libertarian Republican in terms of the way you see government regulation in the children's media marketplace? Or does it do you see, if done intelligently, does it reinforce, maybe your political instincts?
Well,
or somewhere in between?
I've wanted to be on the show for a long time,
I
so
know.
I'm very impressed
Yes.
with these questions.
Yeah.
Those are good questions. I would say that listen, if you're in business and you're trying to do something, and whatever external laws, requirements, pressure come in to make you do things that you wouldn't normally do, I would suspect that most business people, entrepreneurs, have some level of, they don't know as much as I know. I'm on the front line of this thing. And legislation and regulations that address sort of how kids interact with digital media and privacy issues and is going to be very sensitive. So I think the people who are trying to make these regulations have a hard time. In addition, there are some very, very, very powerful companies who want to influence how that's done, from the Disneys and the Knicks to the Google YouTubes. Right. I mean, wherever you want to go. And their interests are not necessarily the same, and the regulations are not necessarily driven by overall concerns of the industry, as opposed to maybe what those guys need. Yeah. So it's complicated. Does that turn me into, on a personal level, I've kind of decided that I understand why there's a need for it. It's not always done very well. It hasn't changed my overall view of the world, no. But I certainly, having owned my own company for 23 years, am more sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of things that the government does that probably don't help people doing business and don't fulfill the goals that the government thinks that they're fulfilling.
But it hasn't gotten to you to wear pants with whales on them or anything like that at this point?
Not publicly.
Yeah, excellent. So Razor and Tie has obviously, as you said, gone a lot of directions over the time. Is there something that it isn't that you want it to be? What's kind of next for Razor and Tie? Either you don't have to divulge plans, but something you'd want it to be, maybe that's off in the future.
Well, we're actually kind of doing it now. I would say that the one thing that Razor and Tie has been successful in a number of different ways over the years, but ironically, what we haven't really been that successful with is sort of acting like a traditional record label. We've been very successful with compilations and Kids Bop and different projects and the like. We don't have a long, tremendous history of signing artists, recording artists, signing songwriters and the like. And we're actually doing really, really well with that now, and I think are in a position to be a significant player on the sort of new content creation mode. So
it raises a question: is being a successful record label? I don't know if that's an oxymoron anymore. Is that something you can you be a successful traditional record label anymore?
No. You cannot be a successful traditional record label, but I'm very optimistic for the first time in quite some time about the music business, and I think you can be a successful music company, and I think that what that takes is very different than what it took 5 or 10 years ago. The marketplace is dramatically different. Do you want me to?
Yeah. No, look, I think, you know what, I think what you've done is kind of tease us with the optimism of the future of the music business, which maybe is a counter narrative to what some people think when they think of the music business. I want to take that up in the next show. If I can ask you to come back and do the show again next week.
I would be happy to.
All right, very good. I know you've been wanting to do it for so long. Why not do another one? So with that, let me say thank you for joining us. This has been Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homonoff, and thank you. Good night.